"The Lord, could you pretend to be my son's father?" But his answer shocked her. Welcome to a journey through the heart of Brazil in 1878, where human dignity shines brighter than any noble title, and where true love is born from the shared silence between two wounded souls. This is the story of Isabelle, a woman who lost everything but her dignity, and Dom Miguel, a man who had everything but the courage to live. Between them, a baby who would become a bridge between two worlds, two sorrows and two lost hopes. Where are you watching us from? Leave your city in the comments. Subscribe and leave your like. It keeps alive stories that remind us humanity always finds a way, even in the darkest nights. Year 1878. Location, Vila Escondida and Fazenda Vale do Cedro, Rio das Pedras Valley, Imperial Brazil. The April afternoon fell over Vila Escondida like a veil of mourning. Isabelle Mendes stood alone in the center of the square, holding a bundle of breathing cloths against her chest. 5 days old, 4 months without a father. Her black widow's dress dragged in the red dust. The torn mantilla marked the violence of the expulsion. Donna Augusta's words still echoed, "This child is not my son's. 7 months and a baby is born? He won't see a cent from this family." Isabelle pressed Pedro, as she had secretly named him, against the chest that ached from recent childbirth. The midwife was wrong about the months. It had been nearly 9 since her last night with Carlos, before the yellow fever took him. The windows around her closed. No one would defy Donna Augusta, widow of the province's largest coffee merchant. Isabelle was 21 and completely alone. An orphan since she was 15, with no relatives, no kind godparents. The sun hid behind the mountains, tinging the sky orange and violet. The fountain spilled water that no one offered her. The chapel was locked. There was only one place to go, 3 leagues to Fazenda Vale do Cedro, Cedar Valley Farm, where a chapel, Nossa Senhora das Dores, Our Lady of Sorrows, might have mercy on a desperate mother. With every step, her body protested. With every step, Pedro breathed softly against her heart. As the day died and the valley filled with shadows, Isabelle walked toward the only remaining destination, the generosity of strangers, or a silent death on the roadside. What she didn't know was that, in that distant chapel, someone was also seeking refuge, not from poverty, but from a pain that 12 years had not healed. The world narrowed to the rhythm of her steps, one foot in front of the other. The pain that rose from her legs crossed her still swollen belly and settled in her back like a live ember. Isabelle did not stop. She could not stop. The baby in her arms was light as a feather, but heavy as the entire uncertain future she carried. The dirt road snaked between vast coffee plantations, endless rows of dark green shrubs crowned with red berries that, in other circumstances, Isabelle would have found beautiful. The sun, increasingly low, painted everything golden, the dust her feet raised, the leaves that trembled in the wind, the dark trunks of the ancient trees that lined the path. A smell of wet earth rose from the ground. It had rained the night before, and the mud clung to the hems of Isabelle's black dress, making each step even more painful. She felt blood descending, warm and viscous, down her legs. She knew she should be resting, lying down with medicinal herbs on her belly, drinking fortifying broths. But the world did not grant rest to those who had nowhere to rest. Pedro whined, a soft, startled sound. Isabelle stopped, leaned against a jequitibá trunk, whose bark was covered in emerald green moss, and adjusted the blanket around her son. His face was pale, his lips small and pink. She touched his forehead with her lips. Too hot, or was it her own fever confusing her senses? "Almost there, my boy," she whispered. Almost there, but she didn't know if that was true. The road seemed endless. The sky, which was orange, now bled into shades of purple and indigo. The first stars began to pulse above, cold and distant. Isabelle passed a wooden cross driven into the roadside. It was covered with dried flowers and faded ribbons. She knew what it marked, the place where a runaway slave had been killed years ago, hunted by captains of the woods, slave catchers. She shivered. How many unseen crosses existed in that immense Brazil? How many lives extinguished without record, without name, without lament? My son will not be a cross without a name, she thought, with a sudden determination that gave her strength to continue. The wind grew cold. Isabelle began to tremble. Fever or cold, she couldn't distinguish. She hummed an old folk song her mother used to sing, a simple melody about a little bird flying from tree to tree, looking for a nest. Her voice came out shaky, but Pedro seemed to calm down. After what seemed like hours, and perhaps was because the moon was already rising, fat and silvery, Isabelle saw the walls, tall, made of precisely stacked grey stone, crowned with wild vines cascading down, and further on, the iron gate with the Almeida family crest forged in the centre, a stylized cedar surrounded by stars. Isabelle wanted to cry from relief, but no tears came. She was dry inside, burned by fever and despair. She followed the side of the wall until she spotted the chapel. It was small, made of white stone, and a red clay roof, with a simple bell tower rising against the night sky. Narrow, arched windows leaked candlelight outward. Someone was inside. Isabelle climbed the 3 stone steps leading to the carved wooden door. Her legs failed. She fell to her knees, clutching Pedro to protect him from the fall. The world spun. She heard her own heart beating in her ears, fast and erratic. With the last strength she had, she pushed the door. It opened with a soft groan of ancient hinges, and the smell of incense and candle wax enveloped Isabelle like an embrace. Inside, with his back to her, before the altar covered in flickering votive candles, stood a man, tall, broad shoulders under a dark overcoat, black hair with silver threads at the temples. He was motionless, his hands crossed behind his back, his head bowed in a posture of prayer or lament. And then Pedro cried, a sharp, hungry, desperate cry, the cry of a newborn child that breaks silences and cuts through walls, a sound that Chapel had not heard for 12 long years. The man turned slowly, and his eyes, grey as riverstone, deep as old wells, met Isabelle's. Dom Miguel de Almeida did not expect visitors. He expected nothing, in fact, except the familiar company of his dead. Every Tuesday at nightfall, he came to the chapel of Our Lady of Sorrows, lit the candles before the crypt under the altar, and remained there in silent vigil until the wax melted completely. 12 years. 12 years since that stormy night in 1866, when the rain fell so hard it destroyed bridges and blocked roads, preventing the midwife from arriving in time. Cecilia was only 17, her belly 8 months round, her eyes bright with expectation. "It will be a boy, Miguel," she would say, stroking her stomach. "I can feel it. He will be strong like you." But the baby never breathed, and Cecilia bled until her skin was the color of candle wax, until her lips lost the color of the roses she loved so much, until her heart stopped beating at the exact moment the storm ceased and the first ray of sun broke through the grey clouds. Miguel buried his wife and son in the crypt beneath the altar, according to the Almeida family tradition. Since then, he lived as a man who merely fulfills obligations. He managed the farm with military precision learned in the Paraguayan War, treated the workers justly, kept the property prosperous. But he did not truly live. He merely existed, as trees exist, as stones exist. And now, that cry, sharp, insistent, completely alive. Miguel turned and saw the woman kneeling at the entrance to the chapel, black widow's dress, torn mantilla, face pale as the rising crescent moon outside. In her arms, a bundle of cloths from which came that cry that made something inside Miguel's chest painfully contract, something he had judged dead long ago. "Sir," the woman's voice came out weak, hoarse. "Sir, for pity." Miguel descended the altar steps. The candlelight played on his face, revealing features marked by sun and time, close-cropped beard with threads of grey, wrinkles around his eyes, a thin scar on his left temple, a memory of a Paraguayan bullet that had passed too close. He was 32, but looked older. Grief ages faster than time. He approached the woman and knelt before her, defying all social protocols. A landowner does not kneel before a poor woman. But Miguel did not think of that. He only thought that she was feverish. He saw it by the red blotches on her neck, by her rapid breathing, by the feverish glow in her dark eyes. "You are sick," he said. His voice was grave, accustomed to giving orders, but came out soft. "How long ago did you have this child?" 5 days, sir." Isabelle's eyes filled with tears that did not fall. 5 days. Miguel knew this woman, not personally, but he knew her story. She was Isabelle Mendez, widow of Carlos Mendez, who had died in the yellow fever epidemic. Carlos was a Freemason from the same lodge as Miguel, an honorable man with an easy laugh, who spoke of his pregnant wife with pride and tenderness. Miguel had been at the funeral, observing from afar the young widow who bore her grief with a silent dignity that had caught his attention. And now she was there, expelled and desperate, because Donna Augusta, that harpy, had decided the baby was not her grandson. "I came to ask for shelter, sir." Isabelle swallowed hard. "I have nowhere to go. I have nothing." Pedro cried louder. Isabelle tried to rock him, but her arms trembled with exhaustion. Miguel, without thinking, held out his hands. "Give me the child." Isabelle hesitated. These large, calloused hands, the hands of a man who works the land, could they hurt? But something in Miguel's gaze reassured her. They were sad eyes, but not cruel. They were eyes that knew loss. She handed over the bundle. Miguel held the baby carefully, like one holding something both sacred and terrible. He pulled back the cloths. The small face reddened by crying, eyes tightly closed, fists clenched. So fragile, so alive. Something broke inside Miguel. A dam he had built stone by stone for 12 years. He felt warm tears stream down his face, wetting his beard. He hadn't cried since Cecilia's funeral. "He needs a doctor," Miguel said, his voice choked. "And so do you." "I have no money, sir. I have nothing to offer." Isabelle clasped her hands as if in prayer. "But I am willing to work. I can cook, sew, take care of—" "That is not what you want to ask," Miguel interrupted, looking directly at her. "You did not come all this way just for temporary shelter. You came because you have no other choice. You came because your son needs a name to protect him." Isabelle froze. How did he know? How did this man read the despair in her heart so easily? And then, in an explosion of courage born of total desperation, Isabelle said the unthinkable. "Recognize him as your son, sir." The voice came out in an urgent whisper. "I know it's madness. I know I have no right to ask this, but my boy will die nameless, unbaptized, without—" Her voice failed. "Your son, sir. Your son who never breathed. He would be this age now. My Pedro could be him." The silence that followed was dense as the night outside. The candles flickered. The baby, finally, had quieted in Miguel's arms, as if recognizing a father where there was no paternity, a haven where there was no promise. Miguel looked at the altar, at the crypt where Cecilia and the son he never knew lay. He looked at the baby in his arms. He looked at the kneeling woman, who offered him both everything and nothing, the chance to redeem a loss, the weight of a lie, the possibility of life in a house that had become a mausoleum. "Stand up," he said finally. "The floor of a chapel is no place for decisions that change destinies." Isabelle rose with difficulty, her shaky legs threatening to fail again. She leaned on the nearest wooden bench, feeling the world spin. The fever was worse. She knew it was. But it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the answer Miguel had not yet given. He still held Pedro, rocking him with an almost unconscious movement, as if his body remembered gestures his mind had locked in a dark cell 12 years ago. Miguel looked at the baby with an expression Isabelle could not decipher. Pain, tenderness, something dangerously close to hope. "Senora Isabelle," Miguel began, and the formality in the address seemed to create a necessary distance between the moment and the madness being proposed. "What you are asking is not simple. It is not just signing a paper or giving a temporary surname. My name carries weight in this province. The Almeidas have been on this land for 3 generations. We are counselors to the emperor, friends of barons, owners of farms that feed entire cities." Isabelle felt her heart sink. It was a refusal. Of course it was. "I understand, sir." Her voice was weak. "I was foolish to ask. Forgive my audacity. I have not finished." Miguel interrupted her, still not taking his eyes off Pedro. "What I was saying is that my name cannot be used as a fleeting lie. If I recognize this child as mine, it will not be a charade to give him a registry and then forget him. It will be real, legal recognition, with all the consequences that brings." Isabelle blinked, trying to understand. "Sir?" Miguel finally looked at her, and there was something fierce in those gray eyes. "This boy will be named Pedro de Almeida. He will be registered as my son. He will have my name, my protection, and all the rights that implies. And you, Isabelle Mendez, will have a place in this house. Not as a servant, but as the mother of the child, with the respect and dignity your position requires." The world seemed to stop. Isabelle couldn't breathe. "Sir, I cannot accept this. It is too generous. It is what is right." Miguel handed the baby back to Isabelle, and the gesture was soft, careful. "Carlos was my brother of the Masonic Lodge. A good man. If he were alive, he would have protected his son. Since he is not, the responsibility falls to the brothers who remain." But it wasn't just that, and both knew it. There was something more in that decision, something about empty plates and second chances, about silent houses that cried out for life, about men who carry the dead on their backs, and women who carry the living in their arms. "Why, sir?" Isabelle asked, her voice trembling. "Why would you do this for us?" Miguel turned to the altar, to the candles burning before the crypt. "Because this house has been empty for too long. Because I made a promise to Cecilia that I would bring life back to these walls, and I failed. Because—" his voice failed. "Because the Lord does not want more life dying at his doors." He picked up the nearest candlestick and walked toward the chapel exit. "Come, I will take you to the manor house. Dr. Suarez will be summoned. You and the child will receive proper care." "Dom Miguel," Isabelle called, and he stopped on the threshold of the door, looking over his shoulder. "Thank you. Thank you for seeing what others refuse to see." "Don't thank me yet, Senora Isabelle." Miguel's voice carried something dark, heavy. "The path we are treading will not be easy. Society does not easily forgive those who defy its rules. Dona Augusta will not accept this in silence, and you will have to live in a house haunted by ghosts." "Ghosts do not scare me, sir." Isabelle pressed Pedro against her chest. "I've lived with them long enough." Miguel nodded slowly, as if recognizing in her a companion in exile, someone who also knew the weight of carrying absences. "Then let's go. The night is cold, and the dead can wait. The living cannot." He left the chapel, the light from the candlestick swinging and creating dancing shadows on the walls. Isabelle followed him, moving from the golden candlelight into the silvery moonlight, leaving behind the chapel of Our Lady of Sorrows, which that night had heard the strangest request of its long existence. And perhaps, just perhaps, the Lady of Sorrows, she who knew so well the pain of losing a child, had bowed her marble head in silent assent. The walk to the manor house was short, but for Isabelle, every step was a battle against a body that threatened to give way. Miguel noticed her difficulty, and without a word handed the candlestick to her and took Pedro from her arms. "I can carry him, sir," Isabelle weakly protested. "You can, but you should not." The answer was simple, final. Then Miguel did something Isabelle would never expect. He bent slightly and with a free arm put it around her waist, supporting her. It was a gesture of necessity, not intimacy, but still Isabelle felt her face burn. No man, except Carlos, had touched her like this. "Forgive the boldness, Senora," Miguel said as if reading her thoughts, "but you are about to faint and I don't want you to fall with the child in your arms." They continued like this, in a strange silence, heavy with unspoken meanings. The stone path was lit by iron torches fixed on posts every 10 steps. Gardens stretched on both sides, gardens that were once beautiful, Isabelle could see, but which now grew semi-wild, as if no one had the spirit to properly care for them. Ancient rose bushes climbed untrimmed, their white flowers gleaming like ghosts in the moonlight. Jasmine-covered wooden pergolas, filling the night air with a sweet and melancholic perfume. And cedars, those majestic trees that gave the farm its name, rose like silent sentinels, their branches whispering secrets to the wind. The manor house appeared ahead, huge and imposing. 3 stories of stone and mortar, tall windows with carved frames, wide verandas with iron balustrades. Lights burned in only a few windows. The house was too big for one man alone. Miguel climbed the wide steps of the front veranda, supporting Isabelle. The main door, made of solid jacaranda wood with blue and red stained glass, opened before he even reached it. A middle-aged black woman, white hair tied in a tight bun, simple but clean dress, emerged holding a lantern. "Dom Miguel!" The surprise in her voice was genuine. "I thought you would come straight from the chapel to the library, as always." Her voice died when she saw Isabelle supported by her master, and the baby in his arms. "Joaquina," Miguel said calmly, "prepare the heirs' room in the north wing." Immediately, the silence that followed was heavy. Joaquina looked from Miguel to Isabelle, from Isabelle to the baby, and her eyes widened. "Sir, the heirs' room has been closed for 12 years, since Senora Cecilia." "I know how long it's been, Joaquina." Miguel's voice was soft but firm. "And it's past time to open that door. The boy will need a crib, clean clothes, a heated room, and prepare the adjacent room too, the one with the jacaranda bed. This is Senora Isabel Mendez, and she is ill. She will need care." "Sir, I cannot accept the heir's room for my son," Isabelle protested, her voice weak but determined. "It is sacred, it was for a child," Miguel interrupted. "And it will be used by a child. That is what Cecilia would have wanted." He looked at Joaquina. "And send for Dr. Suarez. Say it is urgent." Joaquina hesitated for another moment, her eyes scanning Miguel's face as if looking for signs of fever or madness. But then something in her seemed to give way. Perhaps it was the determination in his voice. Perhaps it was the way he held that baby, with tenderness and despair mixed. Or perhaps it was simply relief. 12 years seeing her master waste away in grief, and now suddenly life returning to that house. "Yes, sir." Joaquina made a small reverence and hurried up the stairs, the lanterns swinging and creating shadows that ran across the walls. Miguel led Isabelle inside. The entrance hall was wide, with imported marble floor, a double staircase that curved elegantly upwards, crystal chandeliers that reflected the light of the few lit candles. Walls covered with oil portraits, stern-faced Almeida ancestors, coffee harvests painted in vibrant colors, landscapes of the valley. Isabelle felt small, inadequate in that place of opulence. Her worn clothes, her calloused hands, her feverish body, everything about her screamed that she did not belong there. As if sensing her thoughts, Miguel said quietly, "Manor House is just stone and wood, Senora Isabelle. What matters are the people inside it. And this house has been empty of people for too long." He guided her to a green velvet armchair in the living room, helping her sit down. Pedro had fallen asleep in his arms, his small face relaxed, finally at peace after hours of crying and hunger. "Joaquina will bring tea and something to eat," Miguel said. "And before you protest, it is not a request. It is an order. You serve no one malnourished and feverish." Isabelle did not have the strength to argue. She leaned her head back on the armchair, closed her eyes. She felt like she was floating, as if her body was no longer completely her own. The fever was rising, making the world oscillate between clarity and fog. Joaquina returned with impressive speed, bringing a tray with herbal tea, fresh bread with butter, guava paste. Behind her, 2 young servants carried piles of sheets and towels. "The room is being prepared, sir," Joaquina informed, but there was something in her voice, a contained emotion. "It's been a long time since I saw that room open." "It's been a long time since many things happened in this house," Miguel replied, and there was something resolute in his voice, like a man who makes an irreversible decision and finds peace in it. "Perhaps it is time to change that." He looked at Isabelle, who was struggling to keep her eyes open. "Rest. Tomorrow we will talk about how to proceed. For now you and the child are safe, and that is what matters." Pedro woke up and began to whine. Isabelle tried to stand up to comfort him, but Miguel gestured for her to remain seated. "Joaquina, is there fresh milk in the kitchen?" "Always, sir, but such a young baby needs mother's milk." "The fever has dried her milk," Miguel said, and there was understanding in his voice, not judgment. "Until she recovers, we will have to improvise. Bring warm, thin milk with a pinch of sugar, and a clean cloth to soak it in." Joaquina nodded and hurried out. Miguel looked at Pedro, who was now crying more forcefully, his face red with hunger and discomfort. And then, to Isabelle's surprise, he began to walk around the room, rocking the baby, whispering words she couldn't hear, but which had the rhythm of a lullaby. Tears streamed down his face without him seeming to notice. Tears for everything he lost, for everything he never had, for everything this strange baby and this desperate woman represented. A second chance he hadn't asked for, didn't deserve, but which destiny insisted on placing in his hands. And watching that scene, the powerful landowner rocking a baby that was not his, crying tears he had held back for 12 years, Isabelle understood something fundamental. They were both shipwrecks seeking a shore, and perhaps, just perhaps, they could be each other's shore. Dr. Soares arrived an hour later, a short, portly man with gold-rimmed glasses and a worn leather briefcase. He examined Isabelle with professional efficiency, asking questions about the birth, about bleeding, about pain. Then he examined Pedro, listening to his tiny heart with a stethoscope, checking reflexes, weighing him on a portable scale. Puerperal fever, he diagnosed, addressing Miguel, common in women who gave birth without adequate hygiene or who overexerted themselves immediately after childbirth. He looked at Isabelle with gentle disapproval. "You walked 3 leagues with a fever and bleeding? It's a miracle you are alive." "I had no choice," Isabelle replied, her voice weak. The doctor sighed. "Well, now you do. Absolute rest for at least 2 weeks. No heavy lifting, no unnecessary stair climbing. Chamomile and wormwood teas 3 times a day to bring down the fever. Cold compresses on the forehead and reinforced diet. Broths, meats, eggs." He turned to Miguel. "As for the baby, he is surprisingly well considering the circumstances, but he will need a wet nurse. The mother is not in a condition to breastfeed at the moment." "I will arrange one," Miguel said. Joaquina, who was watching from the door, stepped forward. "Maria, sir. She gave birth 2 months ago and has plenty of milk. Her husband works at the sawmill. I know she would accept. Then bring Maria here tomorrow morning. We will offer her a room and food in addition to fare payment. The doctor closed his briefcase, satisfied. Well, it seems you have everything under control, Dom Miguel. I will return in 3 days to check on your progress. He hesitated, then added in a low voice, If you allow the observation, sir, it is good to see life in this house again. After the doctor left, Joaquina and the maids helped Isabelle up the stairs. It was a long staircase, and Isabelle had to stop twice to catch her breath. Miguel went up behind, still holding Pedro, who had finally accepted the warm milk and fallen asleep again. The second-floor corridor was wide, with thick rugs that muffled footsteps. Paintings of landscapes and portraits covered the walls. Joaquina stopped before a double door of dark wood, hesitated for a moment, then opened it. The heirs' room. Isabelle entered and felt the air caught in her lungs. It was a spacious room, with tall windows that overlooked the moonlit coffee plantations. The peroba wood crib was in the center, hand-carved with macaws and bromeliads, polished until it shone. There was a tall chest of drawers with carved drawers, an Austrian rocking chair near the window, a small bookshelf with children's books that no one had ever read. But what caught Isabelle's attention most was the care. The room was impeccable. No dust, no cobwebs, no smell of mold. Someone had cared for that room all these years, waiting for a child who would never come. I clean this room every week, Joaquina said softly, as if reading Isabelle's thoughts. Since Senora Cecilia died, Dom Miguel never asked, but I knew. I knew that someday he would need to see that something was still waiting. Miguel entered the room slowly, like one entering sacred territory. He walked to the crib, ran his fingers over the carved macaws. I made these carvings myself, he said, his voice distant. Cecilia said she wanted the boy to know the colors of Brazil, the macaws, the flowers. She said every child should grow up knowing the beauty of the land where they were born. He placed Pedro in the crib with infinite care, adjusting the blanket around the small body. The baby sighed in his sleep, his fists clenched beside his head. It was time, Miguel said finally, still looking at Pedro. 12 years is too long to keep a door closed. Joaquina wiped her eyes discreetly with the corner of her apron. I will show you your room, she said to Isabelle. The adjacent room was smaller, but still luxurious by Isabelle's standards. Jacaranda wood bed with a feather mattress, fine lace mosquito net, a dresser with an oval mirror, an armchair near the window. And on the bed were spread 3 dresses of cambric and linen, clearly used but still in good condition. They were Senora Cecilia's, Joaquina explained. Dom Miguel asked me to bring them. You are a similar size to her. Isabelle touched the delicate fabric with trembling fingers. I cannot wear her dresses. It would be honoring her. Miguel interrupted from the door. Cecilia hated waste, and she would hate even more to see someone in need when resources are available. He paused. Wear them with a clear conscience, Senora Isabelle. My wife would have insisted. There was a sense of finality in the way he said my wife, as if he were saying goodbye, authorizing himself to move forward. Joaquina helped Isabelle change her clothes, then lie down on the bed. She brought chamomile tea and cold compresses. Miguel had discreetly withdrawn, but Isabelle could hear him in the next room checking if Pedro was well, adjusting the covers. Rest, Senora, Joaquina said, covering Isabelle up to her chin. Tomorrow everything will seem less frightening. But as Isabelle sank into a feverish sleep, interrupted by strange dreams, she didn't feel fear. She felt only a relief so profound it hurt more than the fever. The relief of not being alone, of not seeing her son die in the gutter, of having found, in the most unlikely place, something that dangerously resembled mercy. Outside, in the shadows of the corridor, Miguel remained on vigil. He couldn't go away. It was as if, after 12 years of floating in a sea of grief, he had finally found something solid to anchor himself to. Not romance, not replacement, but purpose. A child to protect, a woman to honor, a house to bring back to life, and perhaps, just perhaps, a chance to forgive himself for all the deaths he couldn't prevent. The following weeks unfolded with the delicacy of silk being woven. Isabelle slowly improved, the fever receding day after day under Joaquina's care and Dr. Suarez's regular visits. Pedro gained weight in the arms of the wet nurse Maria, a young woman with an easy smile who sang folk songs from the backlands while nursing both children, her own son and little Pedro. Miguel maintained a respectful distance. He woke up with the first rays of sun, even before the slaves, and spent the day traversing the farm, inspecting the coffee plantations, checking the sugar mill, resolving disputes between workers. planning harvests. He returned at nightfall covered in red dust and sweat, took a quick bath, dined alone in the great hall while reading correspondence, and retired to the library where he remained late, surrounded by books on agronomy and philosophy. But small gestures began to appear. An imported wool blanket appeared folded at the foot of Isabelle's bed one cold morning. Joaquina swore it wasn't her who put it there. Another day, Isabelle found a small bottle of iron tonic on the dresser, a gift from Dr. Suarez, they said, but Joaquina whispered that it was Miguel who had insisted on buying the most expensive version, imported from Paris. And on the rare occasions when they crossed paths in the corridors, he returning from the field, she going to check on Pedro, Miguel would stop, incline his head in a formal greeting, ask about her health with genuine concern. Isabelle would reply with shy courtesies, whispered thanks, but it was in their eyes that the real conversation happened. Eyes that said, "Thank you for existing," and which replied, "Thank you for letting me continue to exist." News of Isabelle and Pedro's arrival at Fazenda Vale do Cedro spread through the province like wildfire. Villa Escondida buzzed with gossip. Donna Augusta suffered what the doctor called a nervous collapse, locking herself in her house, refusing visitors. But no one dared openly defy Dom Miguel de Almeida. He was a provincial councillor, had friendships that reached the emperor himself, and controlled enough land that half the province depended on him in one way or another. If Dom Miguel had recognized the boy as his son, who were others to question? Isabelle, however, could not forget Miguel's words that first night. The path will not be easy. She felt the stares of the servants, some curious, others suspicious. She heard the whispers that ceased when she entered a room. She knew the story being told was that she was the foster mother, not the actual mother, but everyone knew the truth. One July afternoon, when she could already walk without dizziness, Isabelle decided to do something useful. She couldn't stand being useless. She went down to the kitchen where Joaquina was supervising the preparation of Miguel's dinner. "Can I help?" she asked. Joaquina looked at her in surprise. "You don't need to, Señora Isabelle. You are here to recover your health." "I am recovered," Isabelle insisted, "and I don't know how to sit still. My father was an apothecary. He taught me a few things about herbs and spices. Perhaps I can contribute in some way." Joaquina hesitated, then smiled. "Dom Miguel's dinner has been tasteless for years. He eats out of necessity, not pleasure. If you can change that." Isabelle rolled up the sleeves of her cambric dress, still strange on her skin, but beginning to look less like a borrowed garment. She examined the pots, tasted the broths, smelled the spices in the pantry. She added a touch of ginger to the chicken broth, balanced the salt in the beans with a pinch of brown sugar, prepared a digestive tonic with lemon balm and fennel to accompany the meat. They were small things, tricks her apothecary father had taught her about how good food nourishes more than the body. When Miguel sat down to dinner that night, alone as always in the candle-lit great hall, he noticed the difference in the first sip of the broth. He looked at Joaquina, who was serving. "It's different. Señora Isabelle helped in the kitchen, sir." Joaquina couldn't hide her smile. Miguel tasted the beans, then the meat. He ate slowly, chewing each mouthful, something he hadn't done for years. Food, for him, was fuel. But this tasted of care. After dinner, he went up the stairs toward his quarters, but stopped outside the heir's room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, Isabelle was softly humming a lullaby while changing Pedro's clothes. The baby was kicking his legs in the air, making contented gurgling sounds. Miguel did not enter. He only observed from the shadow of the corridor. He observed how she touched her son, with reverence, with infinite tenderness, but also with fierce determination. She was a mother who had seen the abyss and decided her son would never approach it. "You will grow strong, my boy," Isabelle whispered. "You will have the name of an honorable man. You will live in a great house. You will have opportunities your mother never dreamed of, but you will never forget where you came from. You will never forget that dignity does not come from surnames, but from how we treat those who can give us nothing in return." Miguel felt something tighten in his chest. He backed away silently, returning to the library. But that night, the books remained closed. He only stood looking out the window, watching the moon rise over the coffee plantations, thinking about second chances, and about how sometimes redemption comes wrapped in the most improbable forms. August arrived with white frost covering the valley like powdered sugar. Isabelle was now allowed to move freely around the house, and Pedro was growing robust and smiling, charming even the most suspicious servants with his quiet nature and curious dark eyes. But there was one room that bothered Isabelle. The heir's room, with all its beauty, still carried the weight of death. dried flowers in unreplaced porcelain vases, heavy curtains that blocked too much light, and that beautiful crib that looked more like a tomb than a bed. One morning, while Miguel was in the coffee fields and Joaquina was busy in the kitchen, Isabelle made a decision. First, she opened all the windows. The fresh August air entered like a blessing, carrying away the smell of candle wax and incense that permeated the room. Then, with the help of Maria, the wet nurse, she removed the heavy, dark green velvet curtains, replacing them with lighter ones that Joaquina kept in a chest, cream muslin that filtered the sunlight into golden tones. They washed the wide plank floor with water and ash soap. They waxed the crib until it shone. They replaced the old sheets with fresh ones, hand-embroidered with floral motifs. They filled vases with flowers from the garden, white roses, jasmine, red carnations that perfumed the air with sweetness. And as she worked, Isabelle sang. Not sad folk songs, but cheerful songs her mother used to sing when she was a child. Songs about sunny mornings, about birds that flew free, about rivers that ran to the sea. Pedro, lying in the crib, watched everything with wide eyes, his little hands grabbing at the air as if trying to catch the musical notes. That was how Miguel found them when he returned early from the field, brought back by one of the workers, who mentioned the changes in the heirs' room. He stopped at the door, and Isabelle didn't notice his presence immediately. She continued singing, arranging the flowers in a blue ceramic amphora she had found in the cupboard. Miguel looked around. The room had been transformed. It was no longer a sanctuary of death. It was a living, warm, light-filled nursery. The carved macaws on the crib seemed to truly fly under the clarity coming through the windows. The smell was of flowers and beeswax, not votive candles, and regret. "Senora Isabelle," he said finally. Isabelle turned abruptly, almost dropping the amphora. "Dom Miguel, I didn't hear you arrive. Her hands nervously intertwined. "If I did something wrong, if I profaned—" "Profaned?" Miguel entered the room slowly. He touched the new curtains, ran his fingers over the freshly polished crib. He leaned over Pedro, who immediately smiled up at him, that toothless baby smile that melts hearts. "You brought life back to this room. How could that be profanation? But the old curtains, the flowers, they were Senora Cecilia's. They were Cecilia's." Miguel corrected himself, and the use of the past tense was significant. "But Cecilia is no longer here, and if she were—" His voice faltered slightly. "If she were, she would be doing exactly what you did. She hated dark environments. She said a beautiful house needs light coming in, even when the heart is sad." He walked to the window, looking out at the coffee plantations that stretched to the distant mountains. "Do you know what hurt me most about this room?" he asked, his voice low. "It wasn't the memory of death. It was knowing that we prepared all this with so much love, and that it would never be used. The crib I carved by hand, the books we bought, the little clothes Cecilia sewed at night, everything waiting for a child who never came. It seemed like mockery of destiny." Isabelle approached but maintained a respectful distance. "And now?" Miguel turned to look at her. "Now there is a child here, a real child, not a memory. And perhaps this is what Cecilia would have wanted. Not a sanctuary, but a room fulfilling its purpose. You don't feel you are betraying her memory?" The question was bold, but Miguel didn't seem offended. He thought for a long moment before answering. "Cecilia made me promise something in her last hours." His voice became even lower. She knew she was dying. She felt the blood flowing, felt life slipping through her fingers. "And she made me swear that I would not bury myself with her. She said, 'Miguel, promise me you won't close your heart. Promise me that if there is a chance for love again, for life, you will take it. You don't honor me by living as a dead man.'" Tears streamed down Miguel's eyes, but his voice remained firm. "I promised. And then I spent 12 years breaking that promise. Every day, every moment. I lived, but not truly. I existed. I fulfilled obligations. But I did not love, I did not laugh. I expected nothing beyond the next task." He looked at Pedro, then at Isabelle. "And then you appeared. I didn't ask. I didn't look. But here you are. And for the first time in 12 years, I feel that maybe, just maybe, I can keep that promise." Isabelle felt tears sting her own eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for letting us be part of keeping that promise." "No." Miguel shook his head. "Thank you. For having the courage to ask for the impossible. For bringing life to where there was only mourning. For—" He hesitated, then smiled. A small, genuine smile, the first Isabelle had seen from him. "For making food that actually tastes like something." Isabelle laughed, surprised. "You noticed?" Joaquina is not discreet. His voice had a touch of humor. And yes, I noticed. I've been eating for fuel for so long that I forgot food could be a pleasure. They stood there in comfortable silence, watching Pedro play with his own feet, completely oblivious to the emotional complexities of the adults around him. The afternoon sun streamed through the muslin curtains, painting everything in shades of gold and honey. This room needed this, Miguel said finally. It needed laughter, light, a future. Thank you for having the courage to change it. He paused. It was time. 12 years is too long to keep a door closed. And in that moment, both understood they weren't just talking about physical doors. The August pre-dawn was chilly, with that winter cold that descends from the mountains and penetrates bones. Isabelle woke up to Pedro's crying, not the usual hunger cry, but something more distressed, almost desperate. She got up quickly, wrapped a shawl over her linen nightgown, and went to the heir's room. Pedro was red from crying so much, his little body tense, his legs curled against his belly. Colic, Isabelle immediately recognized. Maria, the wet nurse, had mentioned that it sometimes happened, especially when babies nursed too quickly or swallowed air. She picked Pedro up, began to walk around the room, rocking him, whispering comforting words. But the crying continued, sharp, inconsolable. She went down to the kitchen, prepared warm fennel tea, tried to make Pedro take a few drops. He spat it all out, crying even louder. Isabelle returned to the room, sang all the lullabies she knew, gave him a circular massage on his little tummy as the midwife had taught. Nothing worked. The hours passed. Midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Pedro cried. Isabelle walked, her tears mixing with his. She was exhausted, desperate, starting to consider waking Joaquina, when she heard footsteps in the corridor. Miguel appeared at the door, dressed only in trousers and an unbuttoned shirt, hair disheveled, eyes worried. He must have been in the library. He rarely slept before 3 in the morning. What happened? He asked, entering without asking permission. He's been crying for hours. Colic, Isabelle explained, her voice choked with exhaustion and frustration. I can't calm him down. I've tried everything I know. Give me the boy. The order was soft, but firm. Isabelle hesitated. Pedro was her son, her responsibility. Isabelle. Miguel used her first name without the señora. Give me the boy, you are exhausted. Go get some air on the veranda, drink water, breathe, let me try. There was something imperative, but also supplicating in that request, as if Miguel needed to do it, not for her, but for himself. Isabelle handed over Pedro. Immediately, something in her relaxed, the relief of sharing a burden she had carried alone for too long. Miguel held the baby firmly, resting his head against his shoulder, his large hand covering the small back. He began to walk, not around the room but into the corridor, then down the stairs. Isabelle followed him at a distance, curious and worried. Miguel went down the stairs, crossed the hall, and stepped out onto the veranda. The cold night air enveloped them. Stars shone above, millions of them, more than Isabelle had ever seen in the village. The waning moon hung low on the horizon, a silver sickle cutting the indigo sky. Look, little Pedro, Miguel said, his voice low but clear. Look at the stars. Your grandfather and my father used to bring me out here when I cried from colic. He said babies cry because the world is too big and too scary when seen for the first time. But the stars show us that there is order in the immensity. There is beauty in the infinite. Pedro continued crying, but perhaps a little less loudly. Miguel walked along the veranda, pointing out constellations. That one there is the Southern Cross. 4 stars forming a perfect cross. It was the guide for the navigators who came to these lands centuries ago. He pointed in another direction. There, the 3 Marys, in Orion's belt. 3 sisters, eternally together, never separating. He went back inside, grabbed a rocking chair that was in the living room, and sat down with Pedro. He began to rock gently, a rhythmic, hypnotic movement, and he sang, an old song in Latin that Isabelle didn't know. Miguel's voice was grave, off-key, but it carried something that transcended technique. It carried memory. It carried pain transformed into tenderness. Pedro began to calm down. The sobs spaced out. His body relaxed. His eyelids began to droop. Isabelle, watching from the doorway, felt something break inside her. It was a scene of such deep intimacy that it felt like an invasion just to witness. A man who had lost everything learning to hold on again. A baby who was not his by blood, but who was becoming his in every other way that mattered. When Pedro finally fell asleep, completely relaxed against Miguel's chest, The silence that descended was almost sacred. Miguel remained motionless for long minutes, as if afraid that any movement would wake the baby. Or perhaps he didn't want the moment to end. Isabelle approached silently. "Dom Miguel," she whispered. "Thank you." He looked at her, and there were tears in his eyes again. "Noti," he said, his voice choked. "Thank you for letting me do this, for trusting me. How could I not trust the man who saved our lives? I saved nothing." Miguel looked at sleeping Pedro. "You saved me. This house was dead, Isabelle. I was dead. And suddenly there is life. There is crying in the pre-dawn. There is food with taste. There is light coming through windows I kept closed. You brought me back. I don't know if I deserve it, but I am grateful." Isabelle sat down on the arm of the nearby armchair, too tired to worry about propriety. "Perhaps no one deserves salvation," she said softly. "Perhaps salvation is a gift, not a reward." Miguel thought about that, then nodded slowly. Improbable wisdom from someone so young. "I'm not so young," Isabelle smiled sadly. 21 years old, but I feel like I've lived many lives. Orphanage, marriage, widowhood, motherhood, homelessness, all in such a short time. And yet there is hope in you. I saw it in your eyes from that first night. Fierce, unwavering hope. How do you manage it? Isabelle looked at sleeping Pedro. "Because he needs me to manage it. Mothers don't have the luxury of permanent despair. Despair is allowed for one night, maybe two. Then you get up and continue because someone depends on you. I envy that strength." "It's not strength." Isabelle shook her head. "It's absence of alternative. When there is no choice, you discover you can do more than you imagined." They stayed like that in shared vigil until the sky began to lighten on the horizon, until the first birds began to sing, until Joaquina came down to start the day and found the three of them, Isabelle in the armchair, Miguel in the rocking chair with Pedro in his arms, all asleep in a scene of domestic peace the house hadn't seen for 12 long years. Joaquina didn't wake them. She just covered Isabelle with a blanket, ensured Miguel was comfortable, and began to prepare coffee with a smile on her face, the first genuine smile of joy she had allowed herself since Cecilia's death. The following months unfolded like pages of a book no one knew they were writing. September arrived, bringing spring, flowers bursting into vibrant colors in the gardens that were now cared for again, purple and yellow epee trees covering the fences, real macaws, not just the carved ones, appearing in the cedars to feed on fruit. Pedro grew remarkably. At 4 months he could already sit with support. His little hands grabbed everything he saw. His smile was wide and constant. And even more remarkable, Miguel was changing. It started subtly. He began dining in the small living room instead of the large one, a more intimate, less formal room. Joaquina automatically set 2 places at the table. Miguel didn't question it. Isabelle, after hesitating the first few nights, accepted his presence naturally. Conversations began about Pedro, his growth, his progress, small comical moments that happened during the day. Then they drifted to the farm, to politics, to books. Miguel discovered that Isabelle, despite her informal education, had a sharp mind and insatiable curiosity. She absorbed information like dry earth absorbs rain. He began bringing books to her from the library. First, translated French novels, Dumas, Hugo, then poetry, Gonçalves Diaz, Casimiro de Abreu. Isabelle devoured everything, reading by candlelight late at night while Pedro slept. One October afternoon, when Pedro was 5 months old, Miguel entered the garden and found Isabelle with the baby. She had spread a patchwork blanket under a cedar, and Pedro was lying on his tummy, trying to reach a fallen leaf. "May I?" Miguel asked, pointing to the blanket. "Of course, sir, it is your property." "Miguel," he corrected her gently, "I think we are past extreme formalities, don't you?" Isabelle blushed slightly. "Miguel, then." He sat down, picked up the cedar leaf that Pedro was trying to reach. "Let me teach you something," he said, taking the leaf and bringing it to the baby's little hands. "See, Pedro, hold it like this softly. Don't squeeze too hard, or it will crush." He guided the tiny fingers around the leaf. "Perfect. That's how you respect the delicacy of living things." Isabelle watched the scene with something strange stirring in her chest. Not exactly love yet, but something approaching it. Gratitude, perhaps, or admiration, or simply the recognition of genuine goodness in a world that had shown her so much cruelty. "You are good with him," she said softly. "I am learning." Miguel smiled, and smiles came easier to him now. 12 years is enough time to forget how to interact with children, but Pedro is a patient teacher. And you are a dedicated student. November arrived hot with that humid heat that announces summer. News from the village came through Joaquina, who still had contacts there. Donna Augusta was increasingly reclusive, her businesses declining because no one trusted a woman who had expelled her daughter-in-law and grandson. Some neighbors who initially turned up their noses at Isabelle's situation were now beginning to accept it. After all, if Dom Miguel approved, who were they to judge? One afternoon, while having tea on the terrace, Miguel mentioned, "I need to have Pedro baptized." Isabelle almost dropped her cup. Baptized? It is necessary. He needs to be an official Christian, and he needs godparents, ecclesiastical registration. Miguel studied her. "I thought of having the ceremony in the chapel of Our Lady of Sorrows. Small, intimate. Not the entire province needs to be invited. When? December, before Christmas. It is an appropriate time." He hesitated, then added, "Do you agree?" It was the first big decision they had made together. Isabelle understood the weight of it. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I agree." And then, because courage came easier between them now, "Miguel, may I ask something? Always. Why are you doing all this? Not just the shelter, not just the legal recognition, but everything. The meals together, the books, teaching a baby about cedar leaves. Why?" Miguel was silent for so long that Isabelle thought she had offended him. But then he spoke, his voice low and honest. "Because this house became too big for one man alone. Because 12 years of mourning is 11 years more than Cecilia would have wanted. Because when I look at you, I see a chance to do things differently, to not let more life slip through my fingers." He looked directly at her. "And because, Isabelle, you and Pedro reminded me that I am still alive, and if I am alive, I need to live, not just exist." Isabelle felt tears sting. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for choosing to live." "Thank you," he replied, "for showing me that I still could." Pedro, oblivious to the emotional complexities, suddenly laughed, delighted by a yellow butterfly that had landed on Miguel's sleeve. And the two adults laughed together, a sound the house embraced and cherished, as if it knew it was witnessing a small, precious miracle. December arrived bringing intense heat and a cloudless sky. Preparations for Pedro's baptism occupied the entire house. Joaquina sewed a white baptismal gown using fine fabric from Miguel's own baptism 32 years earlier. Maria, the wet nurse, embroidered delicate little angels on the hems. Isabelle washed and ironed every inch of fabric, wanting everything to be perfect. Miguel invited only close people, the farm foreman and his family, a few trusted neighboring farmers, Dr. Suarez, and he summoned Father Anselmo from the village to perform the ceremony. The priest was an elderly man over 60 who had known Miguel since childhood and had also baptized Cecilia. When he received the request, he expressed some reservations. After all, the circumstances were unusual, but Miguel was firm. The boy would be baptized. Period. On the morning of the Sunday before Christmas, the chapel of Our Lady of Sorrows was prepared. Tropical flowers from the garden covered the altar. Red roses, white orchids, purple bromeliads. Thick candles of pure wax burned in the candelabra. The narrow windows were open, allowing the summer heat to enter, along with the singing of the birds. Isabelle wore the best of Cecilia's dresses, a simple but elegant light blue linen dress that made her dark eyes seem even deeper. Joaquina tied her hair in a soft bun, with a few loose strands framing her face. For the first time since arriving at that house, Isabelle looked at herself in the mirror and saw not a beggar but a lady. Miguel wore a formal black suit with a grey vest, the same outfit he had worn at his own wedding to Cecilia. He was nervous. Isabelle noticed it from the fingers that repeatedly adjusted his tie, from the way he paced back and forth. Pedro, dressed in the white baptismal gown, was radiant. At 8 months now, he reacted to everything with curiosity, pulling at the laces of his own gown, trying to grab the flowers, smiling at everyone. The guests arrived in carriages and on horseback. Joaquina received them at the chapel entrance, indicating the simple wooden benches. There were perhaps 30 people, a small number for the baptism of the son of an important farmer, but enough to witness the moment. Father Anselmo entered from the sacristy, dressed in a white cassock and embroidered stole. His eyes met Miguel's, then Isabelle's, then dropped to Pedro. Something in his expression softened. "My dear brothers and sisters in Christ," he began, his voice trembling slightly but firm, "we are gathered in this sacred chapel to celebrate the baptism of Pedro de Almeida, son of..." The chapel door opened with a bang. Donna Augusta entered like a storm. black mourning dress, face pale with fury, eyes burning with righteous or unrighteous indignation. It was impossible to say. Behind her, two nephews Isabelle didn't know, and a short man with a leather briefcase, clearly a notary or lawyer. I interrupt this farce. Augusta's voice echoed off the stone walls. I interrupt in the name of truth and decency. Stunned silence. Miguel turned slowly, his face hardening into a stone mask. Donna Augusta, this is a religious ceremony. I ask you to leave. I will not leave. Augusta advanced down the central aisle, pointing at Isabelle. This woman dishonored my son. This child is not Carlos's, and now she wants to stain the Almeida name with her lies. Whispers exploded among the guests. Isabelle felt the world spin. She pressed Pedro against her chest, an instinct to protect him even when the threat was not physical. Miguel took a step forward, placing himself between Augusta and Isabelle. You are out of control. I will ask once more that you leave before you need to be forcibly removed. Out of control? Augusta laughed, a bitter, broken sound. You are senile from loneliness, Miguel. This woman is manipulating you. She saw a rich, lonely man and seized the opportunity. She turned to the priest. Father Anselmo, you cannot allow this farce to continue. My grandson is somewhere, buried in a shallow grave because this liar said he wasn't Carlos's, and now she wants to turn her bastard into the Almeida heir. Enough, Miguel's voice thundered, so strong that even Augusta flinched. You cross all boundaries, then prove it. Augusta gestured to the notary. Prove the child is yours. Prove you are not being deceived, because without proof I can legally contest this recognition of paternity and... Carlos wrote to me. Miguel interrupted, his voice suddenly calm, dangerously calm. Months before he died. Augusta froze. What? Miguel reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out an envelope yellowed with age. A letter dated November 1877, 3 months before the yellow fever killed him, 3 months before Pedro's birth. He walked to the altar and handed the letter to the priest. Read it, please, out loud, so everyone can hear. Father Anselmo took the letter with trembling hands, adjusted his glasses and began to read. My dear brother Miguel, I write in despair and hope. As a lodge brother, I ask you to keep this letter and read it should anything happen to me. My mother suffocates me since my father died. She does not accept Isabelle for being poor, for being an orphan, for bringing no dowry. But I love my wife, and I love the son she carries. I fear, Miguel. I fear that if something happens to me, my mother will not recognize my heir. Her pride is greater than her love for me, I'm sure of it now. And my son who is not yet born, but whom I already love as much as life itself, will be helpless. This child is my redemption. It is a chance to do differently from what my father did to me, to love unconditionally, to raise a child in a home where value comes from character, not surname. If anything happens to me, brother, protect them. Protect Isabelle, protect my son. Do not let blind pride destroy innocent life. Your brother in Christ and in Freemasonry, Carlos Mendez. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Augusta was pale as death. She staggered, holding onto the back of a bench. Carlos knew, Miguel said, putting the letter away. He knew you would sacrifice your own grandson for pride, and he was right. He looked around at everyone present. This child is the son of Carlos Mendez, and I, as the brother who promised to protect him, recognize him as my own. Does anyone else have objections? No one spoke. Augusta collapsed onto the bench, her nephews supporting her. The notary discreetly tore up the contestation document he carried. Miguel turned to the priest. May we proceed? Father Anselmo, with tear-filled eyes, nodded. We may. Yes, we may. Augusta did not get up. She remained on the bench, hunched over, defeated, while her nephews whispered in her ears, trying to convince her to leave. But she only shook her head, eyes fixed on some distant point that only she could see. Father Anselmo, regaining his composure, tried to resume the ceremony. As I was saying, we are gathered to baptize— Wait! Miguel's voice interrupted again, and everyone turned in surprise. He looked at Isabelle, then at Pedro, then at the altar where the candles burned before Cecilia's crypt, and then he said something no one expected. Father Anselmo, there is a legal complication I need to resolve before the baptism. Isabelle frowned. Miguel hadn't mentioned anything about complications. Baptizing Pedro merely as Pedro de Almeida, son of unknown father and mother, Isabelle Mendez, would create future issues, Miguel continued, every word carefully measured. Issues about inheritance, about legitimacy, about his place in the Almeida family. Dom Miguel, the priest began, the recognition you legally made should already... It is not enough. Miguel turned to Isabelle, and there was something supplicating in his eyes, something that asked for permission, forgiveness, understanding. There is only one way to ensure Pedro has full, incontestable rights, that no one, ever, can question him. Isabelle felt her heart pound. She knew what was coming. Part of her wanted to interrupt, to shout that he didn't need to, that he had already given too much. But another part, the part that had looked at that man for months, had seen his goodness, his pain, his slow transformation. That part remained silent, waiting. "Father Anselmo," Miguel said, his voice firm but laden with emotion. "Before the baptism, I need you to celebrate a marriage." Whispers erupted in the pews. Augusta lifted her head abruptly, her eyes wide. "Señora Isabelle Mendez," Miguel turned fully toward her now, and his hands were visibly shaking, "has agreed to become my wife. Pedro will be our son, before God and before the law. There will be no more questions, no more doubts." Isabelle felt the world stop. He hadn't asked, hadn't proposed. He had simply declared it. But when her eyes met his, she saw the silent plea there. "Please, save me as I tried to save you. Say yes. Let me make this right." "Sir, Miguel," her voice came out trembling, "you don't have to do this. You've already done so much. You've already..." "I need to." He took a step forward, took her free hand. The other held Pedro. "Not out of obligation, not out of pity, but because in these months you have brought life back to a dead man. Because when I look at this house, I no longer see a tomb. I see a home. Because..." His voice failed. "Because Cecilia made me promise not to live as a dead man, and for the first time in 12 years I feel I can keep that promise." Tears streamed down Isabelle's face. "But what about you? What about your heart? Do you still love Cecilia?" "Still, I will always love Cecilia." Miguel did not deny it, and there was brutal honesty in that. "She was my first love, mother of the son who never breathed, the woman who taught me there was goodness in the world. But she is dead, Isabelle. And I am alive. And you taught me that it is possible to honor the dead by living well, not by dying with them." He held her hands more firmly. "I do not promise ardent passion. I do not promise to replace Carlos in your heart. But I promise respect. I promise partnership. I promise Pedro will grow up loved, protected, with every resource I can give. And I promise you will never, ever, be expelled or disrespected again." Isabelle looked at Pedro, who was watching everything with curious eyes, completely oblivious to the moment that would change his life forever. She looked at the altar, where the candles burned. She looked at Augusta, hunched over on the bench, defeated by her own pride. She looked at Joaquina, who was openly weeping with joy in the back row. And she looked at Miguel, the man who had saved her life, who had recognized her son, who had slowly, silently become not just a protector, but a companion, a friend. Perhaps someday, something more. "I accept." Her voice came out firm, clear. "I accept to become your wife, Miguel de Almeida, and I promise to honor your trust. I promise to bring life to this house, and I promise we will teach Pedro to love Cecilia's memory, because without her, none of this would be possible." The smile that spread across Miguel's face was of such deep relief that it looked like pain. He held Isabelle's face between his hands, touched her forehead with his, in a gesture of intimacy that was not a kiss, but was a promise. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for saying yes." Father Anselmo wiped his own eyes, then laughed, a laugh wet with tears but genuine. "Well," he said, "in 40 years of priesthood, I have never seen a ceremony so unconventional. But perhaps that is exactly what we need to see more of. Love born of respect, family born of choice, not blood." He gestured for Miguel and Isabelle to approach the altar. "Come, if we are going to do this, we will do it right." And so, in that chapel stifled by the December heat, before astonished witnesses and with a baby gurgling in the bride's arms, Dom Miguel de Almeida and Isabelle Mendez were married. The priest's words flowed like ancient honey, blessings in Latin, sacred promises, vows that bound two lives in a knot only death could undo. Isabelle repeated the words in a trance, still not entirely certain that this was real, that she wouldn't wake up in the square of Villa Escondida, Pedro crying from hunger, the morning of expulsion revealing itself to be reality and everything else being just feverish delirium. But Miguel's hands were solid, holding hers. His voice was firm, pronouncing the vows. And when it came time for the rings, he did something unexpected. He took off the gold wedding band he had worn on his left hand since his marriage to Cecilia, a ring he hadn't removed in 12 years, and moved it to his right hand. From his vest pocket he took out another ring, new, with a delicate inscription that Isabelle couldn't read with her tear-filled eyes. "I had it made 3 weeks ago," Miguel whispered, "just for her. When I understood that I didn't want you to leave, when I understood that I wanted you to stay forever." He slid the ring onto her finger, and the metal was warm, as if it had absorbed the heat of his heart. Isabelle had no ring to give. She had nothing. But Miguel took her hand and kissed the back of it, an old-fashioned, chivalrous gesture that dispensed with material symbols. "I declare you husband and wife," said Father Anselmo. His voice choked. "What God has joined, let no man separate." There should have been a kiss. Tradition commanded it. But both understood, without words, that the moment needed delicacy, not performance. Miguel gently touched Isabelle's cheek, and she leaned her face into his hand, and it was enough. It was a promise. It was a beginning. Augusta let out a strangled sound, half sob, half groan. She finally stood up, staggered, her nephews supporting her. Before leaving, she looked at Isabelle one last time. It was not a look of hatred, it was a look of something worse, recognition of defeat, understanding that she had destroyed everything with her own hands. Carlos was dead, her grandson was lost to her, and all for pride that now proved hollow and pathetic. "Forgive me," Augusta whispered, so low that perhaps no one else heard. But Isabelle heard. And she nodded, because forgiveness is a gift you give not because it was earned, but because carrying hatred is too heavy a burden for someone who has already carried so much. Augusta left, her nephews supporting her on both sides, and the chapel door closed behind her with a final sound like a coffin lid. "And now," said Father Anselmo, regaining his spirits, "the baptism." Pedro was passed to Joaquina, who would be godmother along with the farm foreman. Miguel and Isabelle stood side by side before the stone baptismal font, and when the priest poured holy water over Pedro's forehead, the baby did not cry. He just looked around with curiosity, as if understanding that something important was happening. "Pedro de Almeida," the priest pronounced solemnly, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit." And it was done. Marriage and baptism, in a single December afternoon, under scorching heat and with the entire province, eventually, commenting on the strangest ceremony they had ever witnessed. But inside the chapel, there was only gratitude. The guests approached one by one, congratulating the improbable couple, making bows, offering blessings. Joaquina wept openly, hugging Isabelle tightly. Dr. Suarez shook Miguel's hand with a knowing smile, as if he had always known this would happen. When everyone finally left and only Miguel, Isabelle and Pedro remained in the silent chapel, Miguel spoke. "I should have asked earlier. I should have given you a real choice." "You did," Isabelle replied. "I could have said no, but I didn't want to, because," she searched for the right words, "because I discovered that home is not where we are born. It is where we are seen, we are valued, we are loved. And you gave me that. You gave us that. We gave that to each other." Miguel took Pedro back, lifted him above his head, making the baby laugh. "This little man brought 2 shipwrecks back to shore. We should thank him." Isabelle smiled. "We will have a lifetime to thank him. A lifetime to show that family is not blood. It is choice. It is showing up every day and deciding to love even when it is difficult. Especially when it is difficult," Miguel agreed. They left the chapel together. Husband and wife, mother and father, 2 survivors who found in the other not perfect salvation, but a chance to write a new chapter. The stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and the full moon rose huge and silvery over the coffee plantations. A new family had been born, not in the conventional way, not from circumstances that society approved of, but born nonetheless strong and true, built on foundations of respect, gratitude, and a fierce hope that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. Epilogue. The following years brought changes. Pedro grew up strong and curious, learning to read with his father, to cook with Joaquina, to respect the land and those who worked it. Miguel abolished slavery on his lands 5 years before the Ley Aurea, Golden Law, offering fair wages and housing to the workers who wished to stay. Many stayed, including Joaquina, who became a heart-grandmother to Pedro, and eventually to the 3 siblings who came after, 2 girls and a boy, born from the love that grew slowly between Miguel and Isabelle, a love that never erased the memory of those who came before, but which created space for a new beginning. Donna Augusta died 3 years after the wedding, bitter and alone. Isabelle went to the funeral, brought flowers, cried not for the woman she was, but for the woman she could have been if she chose love instead of pride. Fazenda Vale do Cedro prospered. It became known not only for its excellent coffee, but for being a place where workers were treated with dignity, where children learned to read, where no one was expelled for being poor or an orphan. And in the chapel of Our Lady of Sorrows, 2 gravestones rested beneath the altar. Cecilia de Almeida, who died at 17, and beside her, decades later, Miguel de Almeida, who lived until 70, surrounded by a large and noisy family, having finally fulfilled the promise he made to his first wife, to live well, to live fully, to honor her not by dying with her, but by living better. Isabelle lived until 85, seeing grandchildren and great-grandchildren. On her deathbed, surrounded by those she loved, she whispered, "I had a good life, better than I ever dreamed." And holding the hand of Pedro, now a 60-year-old man, a respected senator, father of 7, she passed away. But the true story was not in the gravestones or the official records. It was in the nights when Miguel and Isabelle sat on the veranda, watching the sun set over the coffee plantations, in a comfortable silence that dispensed with words. It was in the mornings when they woke up and decided, again, to love. It was in the moments when they looked at each other and thought, what improbable luck brought us here. What inexplicable grace saved us. Because in the end, we were not saved by epic passion or a grand gesture. We were saved by showing up, day after day, deciding to be kind when the world was cruel, deciding to build when everything said to give up, deciding that family is what we make, not what we are given. And perhaps, just perhaps, that is the most beautiful story of all.